What if one man's claims could threaten a vital trade artery between two nations, risking thousands of jobs and billions of dollars? In a move that sent shockwaves from Washington to Ottawa, Donald Trump threatened to do just that. He unleashed a series of stunning threats to block a critical U.S. Canada trade bridge, all based on claims that, to be frank, were completely detached from reality. It was a digital declaration of economic war against America's closest ally. But he wasn't ready for what stood in his way, an unlikely alliance of his fiercest rivals and members of his own party. The pushback was fast, unified, and came from all sides. Lawmakers, business leaders, and diplomats mobilized immediately to protect a crucial economic link that's far more than just steel and concrete. This isn't just a story about a bridge. It's a story about the limits of power, the surprising strength of bipartisan cooperation, and a behind-the-scenes battle involving a reclusive billionaire, a well-timed phone call, and a political threat that backfired spectacularly. So, how did they pull it off? And what does this all reveal about the state of U.S.-Canada relations and the real-world consequences of political rhetoric? It all started, as it so often does these days, with a late-night social media post. Around February 9th, 2026, Donald Trump took to Truth Social with a jaw-dropping ultimatum. He announced his plan to block the opening of the nearly finished Gordie Howe International Bridge. His post was a grab bag of grievances, ending with a direct threat. "I will not allow this bridge to open until the United States is fully compensated for everything we have given them. And also, importantly, Canada treats the United States with the fairness and respect that we deserve." The message sent immediate shockwaves through the American auto industry and the corridors of power in both countries. The Gordie Howe International Bridge isn't just another project. It's the most significant new land border crossing between the U.S. and Canada in decades. Connecting Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario, it's a 6-lane, state-of-the-art marvel designed to be a lifeline for trade at the busiest commercial land border in North America. To threaten it was to threaten the economic health of countless businesses and workers. But the threat wasn't just shocking for its target. It was shocking because of the foundation of falsehoods it was built on. To get why the backlash was so fierce, you have to understand the claims Trump made and just how fast they fell apart. His post seemed designed to spark outrage, painting a picture of America being fleeced by its northern neighbor. Let's break down the central lies. First, Trump claimed that Canada owns both the Canada and the United States side of the bridge. That was just flat out wrong. The 2012 agreement that got this project moving established from day one that the bridge would be publicly and jointly owned by the Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority, a Canadian Crown corporation, and the state of Michigan. Canada financed the nearly $4.5 billion project, but the ownership was always a partnership. The idea that Canada had somehow snatched up American territory was pure fiction. Second, he claimed the bridge was built with virtually no U.S. content. This wasn't just false, it was an insult to the thousands of American workers who'd spent years on the project. The financing deal clearly stated that iron and steel had to be sourced from either Canada or the U.S. The construction on the Michigan side, including the massive U.S. port of entry and the highway interchange, was all done with American labor. Windsor's mayor, Drew Dilkins, later noted that about 8,000 Americans were employed over the project's life. Third, and maybe the most audacious claim, Trump said the U.S. gets absolutely nothing from the deal. This is where the argument went from factually challenged to economically absurd. What does the U.S. get? A multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project without paying the upfront construction costs. For years, the project was stalled because the U.S. couldn't secure public funding. So Canada stepped in, agreeing to finance the whole thing. They would be paid back over decades through tolls collected on the Canadian side. After Canada recoups its investment, The deal says future toll revenues will be split 50-50 with Michigan. So, to recap, the U.S. gets a brand new trade corridor, thousands of American jobs, use of its own steel, and future revenue for Michigan, all without footing the initial bill. To call that absolutely nothing isn't just misleading, it's a complete distortion of a landmark agreement. The claims were so easy to disprove, it begged the question, why make them at all? To really grasp the weight of Trump's threat, you have to understand what the Gordie Howe International Bridge means. It's not a vanity project, it's an economic lifeline. For almost a century, the main crossing for trucks in Detroit has been the Ambassador Bridge, a privately owned, nearly 100-year-old bottleneck. It's congested, and worse, it dumps trucks onto the city streets of Windsor, creating a logistical nightmare before they can even reach the main highway. The Gordie Howe Bridge was designed to fix exactly that, providing a seamless, freeway-to-freeway connection. For the North American auto industry, which runs on just-in-time manufacturing, this is a game changer. Auto parts can cross the border multiple times before a car is even assembled, and a delay of just a few hours can shut down an entire plant. The Gordie Howe Bridge was the long-awaited fix. Suddenly, a presidential threat put all of that at risk. The reaction from the business world was immediate panic. The Anderson Economic Group, a Michigan-based firm, estimated that delaying the bridge's opening could cause direct losses of up to $7 million per week. And that was just the direct cost. The ripple effects on the supply chain would be exponentially worse, threatening jobs and raising costs for everyone. This is why Michigan Democrats like Senator Alyssa Slotkin and her colleague Senator Gary Peters didn't pull any punches, calling the threat economic sabotage. They argued Trump was willing to punish Michigan's economy and hold vital infrastructure hostage as a bargaining chip in his trade disputes. The head of the Detroit Regional Chamber called the bridge the most consequential infrastructure project of this generation, warning of dire consequences. Trump wasn't just threatening a bridge. He was threatening to jam the gears of the entire Great Lakes economy. This threat didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was the latest explosion in a simmering trade dispute with Canada that had been brewing since 2025. The Trump administration had hit various Canadian goods with tariffs, and Ottawa had fired back. The Truth Social post even mentioned Canadian tariffs on U.S. dairy and alleged that U.S. alcohol was being kept off shelves in Ontario. The bridge, it seemed, was being turned into the ultimate piece of leverage. What made this so ironic, and what really exposed the threat as a political ploy, was Trump's own history with the bridge. He wasn't some longtime opponent, quite the opposite. Back in February 2017, he stood with then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and issued a joint statement. In it, they specifically highlighted the Gordie Howe International Bridge, calling for its expeditious completion and praising it as a vital economic link. That complete 180 was incredibly telling. The facts about the bridge, the financing, the ownership, the economic need hadn't changed one bit between 2017 and 2026. The only thing that had changed was the political mood and Trump's willingness to use a project he once praised as a weapon. It was a clear sign this had little to do with the bridge deal itself and everything to do with power. And as the story unfolded, it became clear this change of heart might not have been his idea alone. There was another player, a far less visible one, whose family had been fighting this bridge for over a decade. To find the real source of this firestorm, you have to look past the White House and across the river to the aging Ambassador Bridge, and you have to understand the family that owns it, the Marowns. The patriarch, Manuel Matty Marown, who passed away in 2020, bought the bridge in the 1970s and turned it into his private ATM. His son, Matthew, inherited the empire and saw the new, publicly owned Gordie Howe Bridge as an existential threat to his monopoly. The Moran family waged a relentless war to stop it. They spent tens of millions on lobbying, filed a flood of lawsuits, and even bankrolled a failed $30 million ballot initiative in Michigan to block its construction. And Matthew Moran was a major donor to Donald Trump and the Republican Party. This relationship moved front and center in February 2026. A bombshell report from the New York Times, citing sources, laid out a timeline that was too convenient to ignore. On the very day of Trump's Truth Social post, Matthew Moran had a meeting in Washington, D.C. with Howard Lutnick, Trump's Commerce Secretary. According to reports, Lutnick then placed a phone call to Donald Trump. Just hours after that call, Trump's post threatening the bridge went live. The sequence of events looked damning. A billionaire whose monopoly was threatened by a public bridge meets with a top cabinet official. That official then speaks to the president. The president then issues a threat using false information that would uniquely benefit that billionaire. As one legal expert put it, this really to me smells like a shakedown. While not definitive proof of a quid pro quo, the appearance of transactional politics was overwhelming. It looked like a billionaire, after losing every other fight, was making one last desperate play to the highest office in the land. The reaction to this apparent cronyism was instant and furious, especially from Michigan Democrats who had fought for the new bridge for years. They saw it as a blatant act of corruption. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, whose district is directly impacted, didn't hesitate to call it blatant corruption, accusing the president of doing a donor's bidding at the expense of her constituents. Senators Alyssa Slotkin and Gary Peters went on the attack, framing the move as economic sabotage. They hammered home the message that Trump's threat was a reckless gamble with Michigan's economy and jobs. And the anger wasn't just talk. In the House of Representatives, Congressman Robert Garcia, a top Democrat on the Oversight Committee, launched an inquiry. He fired off a letter to Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, demanding all documents and communications related to his meeting with Matthew Moran. This was a clear signal that Congress wasn't going to let this slide. The threat of subpoenas and public hearings suddenly hung over the administration. They were putting the White House on notice. If this was a corrupt bargain, they were going to find out. If the story had stopped there, it would have been just another partisan fight. But it didn't. What made this whole thing so remarkable, and what ultimately sealed the threat's fate, was that the opposition wasn't just coming from Democrats. A critical wall of resistance came from within his own party. One of the most important voices was former Michigan Governor Rick Snyder. Snyder, a Republican, was one of the key architects of the original bridge deal in 2012. He knew the facts inside and out. He publicly rebuked Trump's threat, reminding everyone of the huge benefits the bridge brought his state. His defense carried enormous weight, coming from a respected Republican who had personally negotiated the very deal Trump was trying to shred. This put other Michigan Republicans in a tough spot, especially those in competitive races. Some tried to walk a tightrope, spinning the threat as a clever negotiating tactic to get a better deal. But a full-throated defense of a policy that would kneecap Michigan's economy was political suicide. Their cautious response was a far cry from the enthusiastic support the White House was likely hoping for. While a few hardline Trump allies in the state legislature did back the president, they were mostly drowned out. The powerful voices in the Michigan GOP, from the former governor to nervous statewide candidates, saw the danger. The business community, a traditionally Republican-leaning group, was united against the threat. This was no longer Trump versus the Democrats. It was Trump and a handful of loyalists against a broad bipartisan coalition that was united in protecting the economy. While the political storm raged in the U.S., the Canadian response was a masterclass in calm, firm diplomacy. There was no panic, no fiery rhetoric. Instead, they offered a steady, methodical takedown of the misinformation. Ontario's Premier, Doug Ford, a conservative politician, stated simply, that the bridge would open as planned. The most critical move came from Canada's Prime Minister, who called Donald Trump directly. By all accounts, the conversation wasn't a fight. Instead, the Prime Minister calmly walked Trump through the facts of the agreement his own administration once praised: the joint ownership, the Canadian financing, the U.S. labor, and the long-term revenue for Michigan. He later described it as a positive conversation. This diplomatic approach was incredibly smart. It gave Trump no battle to rally against and simply dismantled his argument. Windsor's mayor, Drew Dilkens, also publicly called Trump's claims nonsensical and insane, expressing confusion that the president seemed to have no idea about a project he once supported. He pointed to the American jobs and the U.S. steel used on the project, acting as an on-the-ground fact-checker for the media. This three-pronged response, fierce bipartisan opposition in the U.S., the looming threat of a congressional probe, and firm, fact-based diplomacy from Canada, created a political vice that was slowly tightening. His threat, meant as a show of strength, was quickly turning into a political embarrassment. He was isolated, his claims were being debunked in real time, and his own party in the state most affected was turning on him. The climb down was becoming inevitable. There was no big press conference where the threat was taken back. Instead, it died a death of 1,000 cuts. The shutdown of Trump's interference wasn't one single event, but a slow public deflation of a political trial balloon. The media narrative quickly changed from, "Will he block the bridge?" to, "How badly did he miscalculate?" The unified front was just too powerful. When leading Democrats, a former Republican governor, the Prime Minister of Canada, and auto industry CEOs are all saying the exact same thing, a presidential threat loses its power. It becomes obvious that it's disconnected from reality and lacks the political muscle to be enforced. The actions in Congress were a key part of this. The Oversight Committee's probe into the Lutnick-Moran meeting meant any attempt to move forward would trigger intense scrutiny and potentially embarrassing hearings. Plus, House Democrats announced plans to hold votes on Trump's broader Canada tariffs, showing they were ready to use their legislative power to push back. The White House was on the defensive, and then the threat just faded. White House officials stopped talking about it. The social media posts moved on. The news cycle churned forward. The silence was deafening. The battle had been won not in a final showdown, but with overwhelming and sustained pressure from all sides. The unlikely coalition of Democrats, Republicans, business leaders, and Canadian diplomats had successfully protected the bridge by making the political cost of interference simply too high to pay. So, what's the takeaway from this chaotic week? This was never really just about a bridge. It was a stress test for the guardrails of American politics and international relations. A threat born from false information and what looked like the influence of a wealthy donor was aimed at a critical piece of economic infrastructure. And that threat failed. It failed because of a rare and powerful display of bipartisan unity forged by a common-sense economic need. It showed that even in our hyper-partisan age, there are still issues, like thousands of jobs and billions in trade, that can bring people together. When the facts are clear and the stakes are high, cooperation is still possible. The whole episode served as a powerful reminder of the limits of presidential power. A president can't just tweet away a legally binding international agreement, especially one with deep economic roots and broad political support. It showed that reality, in the end, is a pretty good antidote to rhetoric. Most importantly, this story reaffirms the deeply intertwined nature of the U.S. Canada relationship. For all the political noise and trade disputes, the economies of these two nations are fundamentally linked. The bridge is the ultimate symbol of that connection, and when it was threatened, an extraordinary coalition rose up to defend it, proving that the foundation of that relationship is built on something far stronger than the whims of any single politician. But that's my take on this incredible political showdown. Now I want to hear what you think. Do you see this as a case of blatant corruption, or was it a legitimate, if aggressive, negotiating tactic? Is there a line between hard-nosed negotiation and economic sabotage? And if so, was that line crossed here? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I try to read as many as I can, and this is a conversation worth having. If you found this deep dive useful and appreciate this kind of analysis, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel out. And if you haven't already, please think about subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you never miss another video where we break down the complex stories shaping our world. Thanks for watching.